Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to tonight's event. A few housekeeping notes. Let me just share my screen so that you can all see what I'm talking about. Okay, so tonight's event is Cherry Hill, A Childhood Reimagined, a virtual conversation with author Jona Frank. We're very excited to host Jona, who is a Cherry Hill local, to discuss this fascinating book. Thank you all for coming. A little bit of information first. My name is Tierney Miller. I'm the head of Reference and Adult Services at the Cherry Hill Public Library. I have lived and worked in Cherry Hill for 12 years now. So I'm not a Cherry Hill native, but it is my adopted adult home, and I'm raising a family here as well. We have a very large crowd in attendance tonight, and as I said just a few minutes ago, we will be sharing this video for later viewing. So we will have a Q&A at the end of the event. You can enter your questions through the chat feature as it says on the screen. I already mentioned that tonight we're recording. And you can also purchase signed copies of the book from Inkwood Books, who is always our local partner. There's a direct link, and I can share that in the chat as well so that folks will know exactly how to get the book. And they have signed book plates on the inside. I can show off mine in just a couple of minutes when I stop screen sharing. It's a beautiful, beautiful book with wonderful photography that we'll discuss at length tonight, and a wonderful story. So if you're from Cherry Hill, or even if you're not, it's an absolutely breathtaking piece of artwork and writing. So I highly recommend that you check it out. And this is the link to do so. And like I said, I will share that in the chat so that people can order directly from Inkwood. They are doing both curbside pickup as well as home delivery, I believe. And you can also just shop in the store as well during their limited in-store hours. So just a little bit of information about things we have going on through the library. I chose to highlight 3 specific things that we have going on currently. In the top left corner, you'll see it says enjoy introductory videos from adult services. These are videos that have been created by your local librarians at the Cherry Hill Public Library, mostly tutorials on all of the different things that are mentioned on that image and lots more as well. So they're great instructional videos, ways to learn more about library resources and non-library resources, so check those out. If you aren't sure how to access it, just give us a call and we can walk you through it. The next thing that I wanted to highlight is on Tuesday, February 9th, we are having a virtual chocolate class that starts at 6 p.m. It's a fundraiser. We provide the supplies. So again, if you're interested, check our website or give us a call. We can let you know more information about how to get involved and take part in this really fun class. They're going to be making hot chocolate bombs, which are all the rage, apparently. The third and most important thing that I wanted to highlight here tonight is our COVID-19 vaccine information page. The Cherry Hill Public Library strives to be your local information hub on all important matters, and this is certainly the most important matter going on for all of us right now. So you can see there's a direct link there to our website. It's just chplnj.org/COVID-vaccine. And again, if you forget that link, just go to our website. It's pretty easy to find. You can always give us a call. We'll walk you through it. And that is it for me in terms of housekeeping. So we're back. Can everyone see me? Great. Okay. Let's see. So I will move ahead now and I will introduce our author for this evening in the main event. Speaker view. Just make sure my settings are as they should be. All right. Jona, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Great, okay, good, and there you are. I lost you for a second there on my screen. Okay, so first I want to start with our author introduction. Although if you have read the book, which I hope many of you have, this author needs no introduction. But Jona Frank grew up in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, the daughter of an accountant and homemaker. Her previous books include High School, published in 2004, Write, Portraits from the Evangelical Ivy League in 2008, and The Modern Kids, which was published in 2016. Her films and photographs have been exhibited internationally and are held in the collections of the J. Paul Getty Museum, SF MoMA, and the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, among others. She lives in Santa Monica, California, where she is beloved for her cherry pie. How appropriate. So here is the book. Like I said, it's a beautiful book. This is the cover. And I will say a little bit more about it before we move on to turn things over to Jona. So this book is a memoir by photographic artist Jona Frank, told in captivating stories and poignant images with a cast of actors including Academy Award winner Laura Dern and Imogen Wolodarski. It tells the story of one girl's suburban youth and deliverance. Cherry Hill is a multimedia memoir of photographic artist Jona Frank's upbringing in and flight from a stifling suburban household. Told in words and evocative photographs, Frank's account of her childhood struggles with a repressive mother, mentally ill brother, and overwhelming expectations is leavened with episodes from her rich interior world. Akin to a graphic novel, this hybrid of personal essay and photography breaks open the memoir format, detailing the life of a young artist as she spends her days dreaming of a friendship with Emily Dickinson, longing for Bruce Springsteen, and eschewing the rules of femininity. Frank employs a cinematic approach to construct vivid scenes from her youth, using elaborately dressed sets, era-specific wardrobes, and multiple actors to portray herself as a child. Frank refashions her memories into vibrant tableaux. Strikingly, Frank cast Academy Award-winning actor Laura Dern in the role of her strict and complicated mother in a performance as bravura as her film and television work. As Frank outgrows the confines of her environment and suffocating domestic life, discovering art and photography as the path to her personal fulfillment, she plots her ultimate escape. A unique photographic storytelling project reminiscent of such classics as Fun Home and The Best We Could Do, Cherry Hill is an intimate self-portrait of what it takes to break free of convention and to answer the question, who am I meant to be? So without further ado, we're going to move into a video reading, which Jona recorded for us ahead of time. A lot of times when we do an author event, we have a live reading, but this book obviously lends itself to the video format because of the beautiful photographs and artwork in the book. So let's get started with that. Oh, and one last thing I just wanted to mention to everyone. If you haven't already, I recommend turning up the volume on your own computer as high as it will go. This way you make sure you can hear both the talk, but also the video that we're about to play very well. Thanks.
Cherry Hill, A Childhood Reimagined. For every girl, in every town, whoever thought, what else? It was 1972. The phone rang. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, cutting coupons. I was in the living room looking at the world upside down, imagining the eagles flying around in their wallpaper world and landing perfectly back in place. My mother covered every room in our house with wallpaper, except the room my brothers shared. Theirs had dark brown paneling. Paneling didn't show dirt. Better for boys. But the rest of the walls were covered with patterns that repeated. Flowers always in bloom, birds that never left their branches, rocking chairs never sat in, incomplete stories told over and over. Some mornings I'd wake up wondering if the stories had changed overnight. They never did. In my bedroom, it started as a pastel series of circus performers. And then, when I was 5, my mother replaced the clowns with Holly Hobby doing household chores, playing on her seesaw and holding flowers as she stood faceless in her big bonnet and calico dress. Behind my bedroom door, I picked at the seam and slowly peeled the wallpaper back to see what was underneath. On the back, there was ugly brown glue. Around the glue, I drew a stick figure of a girl and stars. Eventually, I peeled too much and had to use tape to hold it down. Mounted on a small, thin wall between the powder room and the kitchen was a large, black, rotary dial phone. The receiver had some heft to it, and it was easy to cradle between shoulder and ear. I can still hear the ring from that afternoon, a loud, demanding bell that signaled news and possibility. My mother answered, "Hello," in her cheery phone voice. "Yes, this is Jona's mom." I stood up. "Oh, hello, Mrs. Bradley." She let out a surprised laugh. "Jona, she's my easy one." She took the cord, went into the powder room, and closed the door. I strained to hear. Why would my first grade teacher be calling my mother? I stared at the circular braid in the carpet and reviewed my day. I finished all my letters, jumped rope at lunch with Amy, got a library card. Then, well, thank you. I will talk to her and it will be better next week. All right, take care. She hung up and summoned me into the kitchen. I felt a pit in my stomach. What would be better next week? That was Mrs. Bradley on the phone. She looked at me as if I should know what the call was about. She said, "Every time you go to the art room, you watch other people and look at the paper on your desk, but you don't do anything. You just sit there." My mother wanted an explanation. I wanted to answer, but everything felt tight, sort of caught in my throat. I knew my answer, but as I looked at her, I wanted a different one. I wasn't just sitting there. I loved imagining what could be on the paper, but I didn't want to touch it. I wanted to imagine it with circles of every color, or straight lines with all the hues of blue in the crayon box, or sky and clouds, and waves and birds in flight and swaying trees. I liked seeing it, and then, poof, erasing it, and just seeing the potential of that beautiful white page. I should have made something up, but I was a terrible liar. So I said, "The paper is perfect. I like just looking at it, and I don't want to ruin it." My mother stared at me. Too long. It scared me. She didn't like getting a call from the teacher. I hadn't realized I was doing anything wrong. I didn't know the art teacher noticed. Confusion spread across my mother's face. Her eyes narrowed, and she looked pained. And then she said firmly, "When your class goes to the art room, you will draw something on that paper. I do not want to get a call from the school again." So when the next Tuesday came, and we all lined up to go to art, I followed my orders, and I drew. A house with tulips. And I drew it over and over and over. For most of elementary school. Really, for as long as I can remember. No one noticed.
Well, thank you, Jona, for that beautiful reading. And welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
I so wish I could be there in person. I think I'm so tired of my life existing from this chair. But I'm glad that we can do something. So thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for being here. We also wish that we could all gather in person, for sure. But we'll take what we can get. So thank you for being here. Welcome to virtual Cherry Hill, or welcome back, I should say. And we're going to move into the discussion conversation portion of our event tonight. And I just want to note that many of the questions that I'll be reading tonight and that we'll be discussing were actually submitted beforehand by some of our attendees. So I'm going to give credit where that's due. So our first question comes from, one thing I wanted to, that I said I would clarify, but I would be remiss if I did not. Jona is a 1984 graduate of Cherry Hill West High School. Apparently that question comes up a lot, so we wanted to put that information out there. It's West, not East. Sorry, East folks, but hey, it's all one town, you know, unity. So with no further ado, our first question comes from Suzanne Kafas. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And she says, while I think that this is a mother-daughter story, I think it ultimately is a coming-of-age story that goes way beyond Cherry Hill. I'm curious why you chose Cherry Hill as the title.
I think that's a good question. Because it's the foundation. I mean, it's the foundation and it's the beginning and it's my foundation. And it's also meant to be any town. I mean, the idea of it could be Shaker Heights, it could be Sherman Oaks, it could be Springfield. I mean, the idea that it's meant to be this kind of generalized name. And I love that the town is Cherry Hill. And I love the name of it and feel like there's something inviting about that as a title. But mostly because I felt like the story is about a beginning and that's where my foundation is. And it's funny because we went back and forth with that title. Like that was always my working title. But then towards the end of putting everything together, there is a series of romance novels, these horse books that are titled Cherry Hill. And there are so many of them. And my editor, he was like, every time you Google it, we get the horse series. But I kept saying, you know, we can supersede that in some way. So I'm glad that we did. And I was able to get that through. I mean, as soon as you see the horse series, I think you know that it's not my book right away. But that was a little bit of an issue.
That's funny. So
yeah.
things you don't expect in publishing.
If you go on Amazon, it's the first, one of the first things that comes up.
Well, Jane Feld says in the chat, thanks for making Cherry Hill cool.
I'm glad that I did.
Yeah, absolutely. So our next question is, can you talk about images versus words and how the two are intertwined in this book? I noticed a strong focus on these two ideas in your approach to storytelling.
Well, the whole book is really meant to be set up that you read the stories, but that you also read the images. And it is meant to feel like a graphic novel in that way, except that unlike a graphic novel that's drawn and you have panels and the words are coming, you know the characters. This is much more that you have to be intimate with the images. And this sense that it is like holding a cinema in your hand, that you're being told this story like it's a one-to-one cinema directly to you. And really from the very, very first page, the idea is to say, to try to get the reader to look at the images and think, what am I being told here? So, the very first image in the book is a house that was colored in crown, and then it was an assignment that we actually had in art class, and you colored the page with all different colors, and then you colored the whole thing over in black, and you scraped away so that you had the color of whatever you scraped away, the line was underneath. So I remember doing that and wanted to do that with the house, but I also thought it worked beautifully to convey the idea of this. There's one story on the surface and then there's another story underneath, which is so much about what the book is about. And so I wanted to start right off with that. And then you go to the white page. And the white page is really meant to say, you know, this is where everybody begins, and this is everybody's story. And it's meant to say that, you know, we all begin with that looking at us before we begin to think, you know, what can we put on that page? And I spent a lot of time, obviously, from the story thinking about what could go on that page. And so I think if you're thinking about that, like that white page is meant to be inviting, is meant to say, you know, come in, and as you think about, as you read my story, think about your story.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. So something you mentioned made me think of one of our other questions. I'm going to jump to that. And that is, have you ever taken photographs of staged scenes involving actors before this project? And how does that experience compare to photographing subjects as themselves?
No, so this is the first time I did anything at this scale. Now, I have worked in commercials before, so I've directed commercials and worked with actors. But in working in the commercial industry or in the film industry and making films, it does encourage you to think about every aspect of what's in the frame. So in that area, you know, I had to think about how actors were dressed, and I had to think about how their hair should be and how their makeup should be. And each detail conveys something that you're projecting. So I do feel like what happened with Cherry Hill was that all of the work, and I really mean like all of the work I've done to this point, went into this project. And I sort of took from everything and put it into this work. But it was very different for me to think, you know, I want to do something that is, that I have more control over and that is more staged. In all the portraits that I'd done prior, I was always meeting people and having them tell me their story. And then once I got to know them a little bit, I would photograph them. So take my first book, for example, High School, which was partially photographed at Cherry Hill High School West, because that book involved about 18 different high schools where I went around the country and photographed students. And all of that was their choice of what they were going to wear, because what they wore in their clothing was so important to communicate who they were and what group they represented. And the location we photographed in was also really meant to be a location where they were comfortable presenting themselves. So in all of that, you know, we would all of the details would always be talked about, but I was giving them a lot more control with that. But with Cherry Hill, since I was essentially turning everything on its side and saying, you know, I'd spent 20 years making portraits of other people, I'm now going to make a portrait of myself. Then I got in there and had my hand in every detail. I mean, even when we were doing the sets for the house, like I wanted to do the wallpapering just because I thought that would be fun, but I had no idea how complicated wallpapering is. So we got a professional person to do the wallpapering for that person. But you know, I loved having my hands in everything and you know, really doing this kind of installation of my house and of this place.
Yeah, it seems like it was a real labor of love type of a project.
Yes, definitely. And also, I mean, I think one of the best things about the project is just that pretty much everybody I know, everybody in my neighborhood, I mean, it just involved so many people. And that became this thing that was very fun. I mean, and also people just super generous about, like, for example, I used this in one of the pictures, which actually didn't get into the book. We created this dining room, and the dining table came from my neighbor across the street, and the chairs came from my neighbor next door. And the house that we were fortunate enough to get to shoot in was about 3 blocks from my house. And I just feel like for this month that we were working in there, anybody who didn't know about the project basically started to ask questions, and it really became a whole neighborhood event, because we would be walking around the neighborhood with strange things. I mean, you know, with carrying sliding chairs and all these things. So it became this very much this community event, and that was amazing.
Fantastic. I kind of wish that I'd seen you guys when you were doing this project around town.
I know, I wish that, it's funny
True.
because I'm working on this exhibition now for the work, and they keep asking me for behind the scenes stuff, and I don't have that much of it, and I wish I did have more.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned your book High School, and we actually did have a question from one of our attendees, Fred Gruber, who said, I love the book. I think he means Cherry Hill. And he said, I actually have a question regarding one of your earlier works, High School, which I found amazing. What was the genesis or inspiration for that project, and how long did it take to complete it?
Well, I took the pictures over a 3-year period and going to different schools. And it's funny because that project came about after doing a project about kids in Catholic school, and which made a huge difference in sort of the trajectory of my work, because that film went to Sundance. And then while it was showing at Sundance, I had an exhibition of these photographs from Catholic school, which some of the collectors from that exhibition helped fund Cherry Hill. I mean, so it was like this very connected thing of making this film, and then, you know, X number of years later, people still coming back and being interested in my work. But it also was this affirmation that if I look to my own history, I would find stories that other people were connecting to and that were worth telling. And after finishing, I spent a year at this Catholic school making photographs. And then at the end of it, I made this short film. And one of the big things to come out of that project was the 8th graders were, they were kind of hard to connect to, and they were so looking for individual identity, and they kept getting in trouble at the school for different attempts at altering their uniforms or trying things. And the sneakers that they wore played this huge part in how they identified themselves, and the socks, and that was sort of their one piece of freedom, which they could you know, latch onto and show their individuality. And so it started making me think about connecting with adolescents, and how important all those signifiers are when you're in high school. You know, this idea that you wear the right thing, and you carry the right bag, and you have the right label, and just how defining they become in what group you associate yourself with. And then that led me to reading different books about high school classifications, and I just felt inspired to try to recreate these kind of high school groupings and that hierarchy that exists in the public high school. And so that's kind of how it all unraveled.
Thank you. We had a follow-up question in the chat asking, where will the installation of Cherry Hill be?
Okay, so it will start at Bowdoin College in Maine. They have a beautiful museum of art, and it will be in their museum 1 year from now. And that exhibition will be up for 6 months, and we are in process of trying to get that exhibit to travel. It's a little frustrating because we had some things underway, but because of COVID and because of so much closures at museums and people's exhibitions are being canceled, like schedules are a little wonky. But we look on track to have that at Bowdoin in a year, and then we're hoping it travels.
Sounds great. Well, if you know, we have an art gallery in the Cherry Hill Public Library. If we could get on that list, I think, you know, someday.
Maybe I'll check it out. Maybe we can do, one of the things that I have been talking to places about is that we could exhibit just a chapter. And people are very interested in that. Because so if you have a smaller space that you can fill, it could be, and there was some talk of like different chapters in different cities. So we're trying to work that out. So maybe we could do a chapter.
Fantastic. Yeah. Someday when when our building's fully reopened and we're able to welcome people back to the art gallery, we would love to do that. That would be amazing.
I will keep it in mind. Thank you.
So another question we have from the audience is, I read the book twice and noticed all sorts of things the second time that I hadn't the first, especially with the wallpaper. Did you design it with the idea of repeat viewings, and how did you recreate the settings?
I love that that you read the book twice. Whoever wrote that, so thank you, because you know, it's like an emphatic yes that I really did. It was meant to be read and viewed and looked at more than once. And I think that you know, as you take in the stories, you know, you need to go back and see how the images affect the stories. And in all of the toile wallpaper, which open each part of the book, it tells the story of the book. And so that was all part of, you know, very intentional design element of getting people to try to read the images. And, you know, and all the graphics are meant to play on the stories that are being told, which was one of the things that was just, you know, I had such a great team of people to work with, and I feel so, so fortunate with everybody at the Monticelli Press. And I had some additional outside editors, like I had an outside editor on the road trip chapter that I felt really fortunate to work with. But there was just such a lovely synchronicity between all of us, and it was unlike any other project I've ever worked on. I mean, there's something about this book where I didn't feel like I gave anything up. In other books, I feel like I've always had to reach compromises, but I felt like I worked with everybody that I worked with really brought, you know, just their absolute best to it and really connected to the project and really rooted for it. And so I had this great designer named Alex Coleman, and he really loved the toile, which the toile was designed to use for the images in the house. And we started talking about it, and he said, do you think we could get more toile designed? And the crazy thing is that the designer of that wallpaper lives in Spain. And I had seen his work years ago in the New York Times. And he did this toile design of gay life on Fire Island. And I just thought it was just such a fantastic, you know, twist on what the pastoral toile images usually, you know, we've become accustomed to if you follow wallpaper or are obsessed with it in the way that I am. And so I had cut this out of the New York Times and I taped it in my notebook because I have too many notebooks. But it's just as a way to say, you know, I want to remember that and someday do something with it. And so when, you know, when I was working on the book, I wanted to create a wallpaper that represented the story of the book. So the very first wallpaper, which is in the first part of the book, that as you turn the page and it's the red wallpaper and it has the Cherry Hill Estates picture on it, that wallpaper tells the whole story of the book. So there is the house, then there is the tree of connection and the tree of disconnection, and then there is a car driving away. So in this very simple, these 4 simple drawings, it tells this story. But then as we were designing the book, I went back to my friend in Spain, and he drew these other wallpapers that we used in each section. And I just love it because I love that the story is being told to you in more than one way. And it's told in visuals with photographs, and it's told in words, but it's also told in the drawings. And it also plays on very much on things I write about in the book, with the idea of wanting the wallpaper to change or absorbing the wallpaper in the house and looking at it on a regular basis and just thinking about what was going on in the wallpaper. Like I was kind of looking for connections in the wallpaper as a child.
How much did you all photograph in Cherry Hill? Did you spend a lot of time on location? How did the photography and staging aspect work in town?
No, I mean, you know, just because of the distance between where I live and Cherry Hill, I would say maybe 10% of the pictures were taken in Cherry Hill. I did go back 1 year to photograph the cherry blossoms. And I was sad to hear that the cherry blossom parade no longer exists.
There was a parade?
Yes, I was in the parade. I think in 9th grade or something, and I wore a yellow dress and rode it on a float and waved. Right past Cherry.
Oh, okay, so it was on Chapel?
Yes, it was on Chapel Avenue. So yeah, so I came back and photographed the cherry blossoms, and then the last picture in the book, which is the sunrise picture, and I did a bunch of pictures on Kings Highway that didn't wind up getting in the book, and then of course the pictures on Garfield Avenue, which are in the Francie chapter and in the Bruce Springsteen chapter.
I wish we still had the parade too. That's, I loved, so for anyone who hasn't read it yet, Jona just mentioned that she photographed the cherry blossoms. The very first image when you open the book is of the Cherry Hill cherry blossoms, which is such an iconic image for the town. And I feel like it grounds you right in the place of the book immediately. I love that. It was obviously so familiar to me and to anyone familiar with this town. So yeah, lots of different kinds of images. So I want to throw in a couple questions we're getting from the chat. Laverne, our director, says, I've not read the book yet, but I'm wondering if you still have current Cherry Hill ties, family, or childhood friends. Have people reached out to you from the past since hearing about the book?
Well, I'm still very close with the friend that I wrote about in the book who took these road trips with me, my friend Sue. And that, you know, in many ways, she's a big connection to my past. And then there's a couple that lived down the street from me. I used to babysit for their family, and they were enormously helpful to me in just giving me various information on Cherry Hill. Called me when the cherry blossoms were in bloom and said, "This is your time," and I had to get on a plane. But also, you know, like when I did the shoot where I brought my actor to Cherry Hill, they provided a great place to land because I sent them props ahead of time, and we did hair and makeup at their house and put the wigs on and costumed them. So I did have, you know, some old ties that were really nice to be able to go back to. And really, I do want to thank everybody because so many people have reached out to me and have just been so generous with their thoughts and impressions and just memories of Cherry Hill. And I really am thankful for that. And I'm sorry if I haven't been able to answer everybody. It's, you know, but that's been really lovely. And then I was telling Tierney at the beginning that I've just got an absurd number of emails from people asking me if I went to Cherry Hill East or West. And some of them just came through and they just said, "Did you go to East or West?" Not even like, "Hi, I read your book," and I have nothing.
That's it.
At first I was answering them, and then I just started to say, "You know what, you should read the book." But obviously there was interest, but I just thought it was so funny that one piece, that one detail was so defining for people.
It's too funny. Yeah, I feel like that's an eternal question in this town. Probably most challenging for the people to answer that went before there was a Cherry Hill East or West, the Delaware Township High School students, and before they built East. I know a few of those in my family. So Linda Ritterman asks, could the book be set in another place, or does Cherry Hill have a unique character?
No, it could definitely be set in another place. And I really think that it could be said in I mean, I'm talking about the suburbs, but I feel like it could be said in any town because it's really a story about growing up, and it's a story about wanting to find your own experience and wanting to find your own voice. And I think that is very much a universal desire that everybody can connect with. But it is interesting, you know, because like people have written to me and talked to me about their hometown and about how you get comfortable with what you know, and leaving what you know is very much the struggle. So I do think that it's much more about what your initial beginnings are, like what you're initially introduced to and the world that you get comfortable with, and how you break out of that to find how you want to define yourself and to find like what is ultimately yours.
Well, I can say that I grew up in a different New Jersey suburb in a different decade. And I certainly found a lot to relate to here. I think it is a universal story um, for all of us, but I think especially for young girls. I think there was a lot to relate to there in terms of the strictures that are placed on women and girls for who they are allowed to be in our society. I thought that was a really moving part of the book. Um, so Elizabeth Hull asks, how did your relationship with your mother evolve after you moved away?
Um, I think that, I think there's one thing about the story or about the book is that it gave me a way to contain my experience with my mother. It sort of tells one part of our story and it puts it on one path. And I was not always, I think I was hard for her to understand, and that I was this person who was always looking for the what else, for what else is out there and what's next, and what can life bring you, and how is it like to live and be that person, and what's that person's story. And I think that's something that she's never really understood about me. So yeah, so my leaving didn't change our relationship that much. I mean, I feel like the story kind of is the story. I mean, that it's what is contained in the book, and it's just never been that super easy relationship.
Well, that is a good segue to our next question, which is from Jane Feld. And she asks, how did Laura Dern prepare to be your mom?
Oh,
and actually, yeah, if you could just talk a little bit about Laura Dern and how she came to be in the project, and certainly how she prepared for this role.
Okay. Well, we became friends through our kids, and we actually met when our kids were in preschool. And actually that was right about when high school was coming out, and that was all happening when our kids were in preschool. And so it was certainly something. I mean, she is a photography collector and and an artist. She's very interested in what other people are creating. So there was just easy conversations about my work, and that led to conversations about her work. And then our kids went to different elementary schools, and so we didn't really connect that much. And then they wound up at the same middle school, and they found each other, and it sort of reignited our friendship. And so much of being friends, and just the kind of conversations you have with friends about your history and your family and your siblings and just life, that so much of it evolved in that. Because we would share stories. And then I started working on this, and she was just a great source of advice. And she read some of the early stories, and we talked about, what was working in them and what wasn't working. And then I just said, would you be up for playing my mother? And she was engaged in that idea and just said yes. And, I feel so fortunate that she did. And not only because she's amazing and she's Laura and she's so good at what she does, but she really brought to it the kind of experience that I just think that only comes with working as hard as she does as an actor and working for as long as she has. I mean, she is so intuitive about where the camera is and where she should be and where her eye line is. And, there were a lot of things that we did where we were using mirrors, and we were, you're not really looking in the mirror. And so she was playing to a mirror that wasn't there. And she knew how to do all of that, maybe because she's in all those Jurassic Park movies. But she just did another one. But the thing is that she was a great guide for me, because I'd worked with actors in commercials, but this was a whole different level. And And she helped me figure out, she helped me learn how to direct the younger actors. And so that was just an amazing, amazing gift. And then one of the things that we did was in our makeup room, in the house where we shot, I had printed photographs of my mother that I blew up, and they were all over the makeup room. And in the way that she does, which is like she really absorbs traits, character traits in people, she really observed those pictures, and without a lot of dialogue, she took on postures of my mother and facial expressions of my mother. And it was kind of amazing for me to watch as she kind of transformed into her. And also the sense that, like, it is amazing what clothes and a wig and just how it changes a person. And when you put all of that on and you ornament yourself, with these different props, your body changes and your physical nature changes. And she is just an expert at that. So, and it was also, the other thing that I will say is that she was so good for the younger kids. Like for the youngest girl who played me, she just made her super comfortable. And I could tell she was kind of giving her guidance of how to do certain things. And they had a really, really lovely rapport. So that really helped to make my job easier. But also that younger actress was unbelievable.
Yes, she absolutely was. All of the actresses who played you really were. There was such emotion in the photographs that they appeared in. But the young one especially, because it sets the tone for the book. Like she's in those early pages that you included in the reading, and there's so much expression in her face. She's special.
Do things like, one of the things that I would do in directing her is sometimes I would give her a line of dialogue, and I would say, I would do something on set so she could see me, and and I would say something like, when you see me and I just put my hand over my head and I wave at you like that, I want you to say this. And oftentimes the other person she was working with didn't know that they were going to be asked a question. But my direction to everybody was just go with whatever happens. Whatever happens in the frame, you have to just go with it. If somebody talks to you, if somebody throws something at you, because there's a scene where somebody gets something thrown at them, you just have to focus, and we're just going to keep photographing. So she never, and she was 9 years old, and she never once in one of those directions while we were shooting turned and went, "Is this what you want me to do?" Which is so what kids do, and she wasn't an acting kid. She wasn't a kid who'd like gone to acting school. She was a friend's daughter who just had this just incredible presence and knew what to do in front of a camera. So I was super fortunate with that.
Absolutely. So we have a question from our library board member, Kathy Schwartz, actually, who I have to credit with tonight's event entirely, because she was the person who discovered the book and put it on our radar, and she set the whole thing in motion. So thank you to Kathy. And here is what she shared in her question. Kathy said, "I thought the book was masterful and so uniquely conceived, especially impressed that your great artistry as a writer matches your great artistry as a photographer, a rare blending of talents in my estimation. My question is, I'm wondering why you decided not to have any images at all of your father in the book."
Oh, interesting. Well, I really feel like the book is first my story, and then my story with my mother. And for a while, I was trying to shoot, like one of the rules I gave myself was to try to only show my mother's face and my face and keep everybody else in the background blurred out. And I did try casting someone for my father, and I had a series of pictures that we were going to do together, and the actor that I had cast got a job, and we only had the house for a certain period of time, and so I thought, I'm going to have to do it without him, and I'm going to have to let it go. But I also felt like my initial impulse was to keep the story between my mother and I thought, maybe this is just the way that should be. So there were a few things that I tried recreating where you wouldn't have seen my father's face. One picture I really wanted to make that really sticks with me is my father pulling over in the snow after my brother's breakdown and crying in the car. And that is something that, it's just an image that really stays with me in the way that I wanted to make these pictures, which was to access images that I absorbed as a child that there's no record of. And so many of the pictures in the book are meant to be moments that are forgotten. But these are photographs that I think that we all carry with us. I mean, I call it our poetic memory, but I think the idea is that we all have these histories of moments that we think of. And, you know, like it's that thing when someone will be telling you a story and they'll say, oh, I can still see that. I can still see it right now. And they're accessing something that happened 25 years ago. I wanted to go into those moments and say, you know, how can I create them now? And there was something about doing that's been sort of this amazing catharsis, like to have carried all of these pictures in my head and imagine them for so long, and now to have them, you know, as these tangible images. But that picture with my father was one that I always wanted to make, and it was one of those things that I couldn't get the right car, and it was a hard picture to take. So I mean, that's the thing, is that there was a tremendous amount of production that went into all of these pictures, and you know, and at some point I had to give up some of the things that I wanted to do, because I was like, you know, not only was I, you know, designing the pictures and producing them and you know, basically directing this. I mean, I really directed and produced the whole project. I did have a team of amazing people that I worked with when we were shooting in the house and on different sets that involved a production designer and a costumer and makeup person. But, you know, so much of the time I was also wearing multiple hats.
Yeah. Well, that shines through in the book for sure. And I think it certainly makes a lot of sense to me that, you know, you have all these images and you want to get everything out, but you can't put everything down on the page. Some things are going to have to fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
So our next question is this. You're very open in the book about your mother and your brother's mental health struggles. His manifested in a more obvious way following a breakdown. Your mother's in a way that I think we might see as more obvious now, but maybe was less obvious to folks back then. Have there ever been later discussions within your family about the kind of mental illness that your mother struggled with, or what experience that was like for you all?
I think that we all talked about it more, you know, as we got older, and it was more acknowledged. But it was not something that she ever really sought help for. And I think that when life slowed down for her, you know, when her kids left home and there was more space, you know, in her world, she became more reflective. And I think that she turned to Catholicism more. I think she just became more introspective, and that helped her. But you know, I mean, but it's something that it's not always easy to address, you know, when you tell a story like this. But there was mental illness in my family, and people struggled, and people struggle with mental illness. And I wish that people felt less ashamed of that. You know, I think that that these are things that just need to be spoken about, because we all have flaws, and we all have our you know, our internal family struggles of things that just don't go well. And I feel like the more that we keep it within the confines of that house and it's not talked about, it just makes that struggle more. It just makes it harder. So it is, yeah, so that's.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I hope that as a society, we are moving more in the direction of talking about it more openness, recognizing, especially things like depression, which I feel like often flies under the radar, especially inside a home, but can have a real effect on the family. for sure.
Yeah, and especially right now. I mean, I feel like during the pandemic, people are really struggling, and they really need to be talking about it more.
Yes. Isolation and loneliness, would create mental illness where it didn't exist before. So it's a hard time for a lot of folks. So Laverne asks, what happened to Aunt Pat later in life? I had that question as well.
You know what? I'm so glad that somebody asked about Aunt Pat, because I actually have to say this is the first time in any press or anything I've done that somebody's asked. But she died. I mean, she died in the house in Cherry Hill, and she died suddenly. She had a heart attack, and her last words were, "I'm sorry," which is heavy. Yeah. Yeah, Pat weighed heavily. I mean, it's, and it was another form, of confusion as a child, because as you watch things and you take things in and you try to figure everything out, she was an enigma. And as I say in the book, every once in a while she would say, "I guess I'm not going to get married." And I still have days where I think about that, and I sort of catches my breath. That makes me tight in my chest. I mean, just that thing of, she lived with us for so long. She was just, she was part of the house. And whenever she would do it, whenever she would talk about that, I would think, oh my God, you have your own dreams. Like you still think about that. Like you still think like, maybe something will happen and my dream will come true. So yeah, she's an intense figure for me.
That she had her own inner world.
Yeah.
But that she mostly kept it inner. It sounds like every once in a while, a little bit of it would just come out for you guys to see.
And it was also something as a child that, I was always sort of both, I think at times I was kind of embarrassed by her. Like I can remember, going to an event in elementary school, and I didn't want people to think she was my mother, because, she looked older, even though she's actually younger than my mom. But like I say in the book, she didn't color her hair, and she didn't wear makeup, and she dressed plain, and she led this sort of very simple existence, and I didn't know what to make of her at times, and it wasn't something that was always explained to me. I mean, I think that's one thing about growing up, that I feel like I spent so much time watching things and trying to figure things out, rather than having things explained to me or being brought in and being made part of something. Hence, maybe it made me a photographer, but it was this thing of, there's more observation than there was engagement.
Yeah. So a question from the chat. I want to make sure we get to everybody's questions. Barbara Sentel asks, did you attend St. Peter Celestine?
No, I went to Thomas Paine Elementary. But our church, we were we were parishioners at St. Peter's, but I didn't attend the school. Gotcha. But my brothers did. So that's I talk about that in the book, that
right.
all three of my brothers went to had a Catholic education until middle school, and then they went to Brainerd. But I was sent to Thomas Paine.
Right, because as boys, they needed that firmer hand, right? Yes.
I guess that's the plan.
What a funny reasoning. So another question is Suzanne, not our Suzanne, a different Suzanne, Suzanne M, asked if Jona remembers spending time at the library growing up.
I love that question. I mean, what's so funny about this is that looking at Cherry Hill now from 30 years on is so different than what it was 30 years ago. I mean, 30 years ago, Cherry Hill was the mall, maybe the movies, the library, Richmond's, and 7-Eleven. I mean, you know, and the Pathmark. You know, it was just such a small place. And also there was no internet. There was no way to sit in your house and like connect with the outside world. If you were going to connect with the outside world, it was going to be through the phone. Phone was going to bring news. Or you were going to leave the house. You were going to get out and do something. And, you know, and I talk in the book about how I was like, the Cherry Hill Library was a salvation for me. I mean, it was this, it's this place that I would go and I would look things up. I mean, I would spend time doing that. And I don't think I write about this in the book, but I actually, I did get an incredible education in photography from the Cherry Hill Public Library, because I decided there was one summer, and I whatever job I had, I decided that I was going to go through every photo book on your shelves from A to Z and look at every single one. And, you know, in doing that, I discovered a tremendous amount about photography. And I have that notebook from that summer where I spent a lot of time at the library, bringing the books home, sitting in the, you know, the stacks of the photography books. So it was a very influential place. And, you know, and I can't believe Richmond's is not there anymore, because grilled cheese and a vanilla milkshake, that was my go-to. It was like my reward to run over there and get that.
Well, we do have, it's pretty recent, but we do have a place now that's right next to the library that I feel like is in Richmond's spirit. It's called Cub and Bunny, and it is Korean food and ice cream. So that's the new Cherry Hill. And their ice cream is delicious. And I take my daughter there and I think like, this is a little bit like what people had with Richmond's, the library and ice cream.
The building is not there. Richmond's was not there.
So yeah, Richmond's was knocked down, and it's my understanding that the old library building is where the current library parking lot is, and Richmond's was where the current library building now stands. So
Okay.
Richmond's is no more, but the spirit of ice cream at the library lives on. Anthony asks, how did your parents feel about leaving the house in Cherry Hill when they left?
I think it was really hard for them. They live, well, my father died last year. I mean, less than a year ago. And, you know, and they lived there for over 40 years. And it was the beginning. I mean, it was the beginning of what their whole life was, you know, and what all their dreams were. So I think it was very hard to leave. And I still think that they miss it. I mean, I still think that, I mean, they went to Mays Landing, but I still have that feeling that, you know, they sort of left something in Cherry Hill.
It was the beginning for them, and I was thinking when you said that it was also kind of the beginning for Cherry Hill as it currently is. I was just doing research, maybe for a grant, I can't remember, but I was looking at a chart of each decade of the 20th century and the early 21st century, and what the population numbers were in Cherry Hill. And in the 50s and the 60s, it went, I can't remember the exact number, but it went from something, say like 5,000 to 30,000 in a decade. It was dramatic. It was the real, you know, the sort of the classic post-war boom. I can't think of a place that exemplifies that more than this town, for sure.
And that is a big, you know, a big part of the beginning of the book. I mean, you know, that for my parents, who found each other late in life, you know, late in life, you know, by 1950 standards, because my mother was 28 and my father was 31 when they got married. And going to Cherry Hill was, everything was up and coming. I mean, it was this experiment. It was this test of like, what is this new thing, suburbia, and how we're all going to be part of it. And I think that was sort of my struggle with my mother, is that that ideal that she locked into in the 50s, I think she had a very, very hard time letting that go. And, you know, to be in the 70s and say, you know, she's not going to college, she's a girl. And, you know, and me feeling sort of like, what? Like, why why does being a girl have anything to do with whether or not you go to college? That was something that was so hugely formative for me. But that mindset was coming from someplace that I think got locked into, this is what it is to be female, and this is what it is to how you raise a family, and and there are limits to what you can do. And I certainly had the attitude of like, why does one have to be limited just because they're female?
Sure, of course. So we've got a few comments from people sharing their memories of Cherry Hill. Marna said, I grew up playing in houses under construction. I've heard the same from my father-in-law, who grew up in Cherry Hill in the 50s and 60s as well. Jane says, the Patco line was the real arrival of Cherry Hill. And Barbara said, I lived on Weathervane Drive and went to school with Jona's brother.
Wow.
Yeah. Lots of local connections. We have a few more questions, and certainly if people have other questions we've not yet addressed in the chat. I think there was one. Okay, here we go. Here's a question. What was the order in creating this book? Did you write first and design the photos around the story, or did you adapt the story as you took the photos?
It was not a set system. I mean, it was sort of very organic way of working. The whole project took me about 5 years, and I had done this project in Liverpool. And when I was in Liverpool, I had this like incredible nostalgia for the suburbs, because I was photographing at this boxing club, and the boxing club was about the distance that Cherry Hill is from Philadelphia. And that was a path that I took a lot when I was later in high school, because I got a job on South Street. And so I knew this route. And when we were driving this route in England, for some reason, every station would play 80s music. And I was totally like time traveled back to the 80s. And I would get on the plane to fly back to Los Angeles, and I'd start writing about Cherry Hill. And then when I was putting the book together, I kept thinking, why are all these stories in here about Cherry Hill? And I started reading them and thinking, maybe I could do something with this. So I wrote, tried to write more cohesively, like coherently, 3 stories. And then I was talking about it with my husband, who's a cinematographer, and just friends about this idea about like kind of pairing photographs with writing. And a few people said, you know what, you should take pictures sooner than later. Like, don't keep writing unless you get a sense that this is working and that you can balance them out. So one of the first pictures I took was Laura in that kitchen. We used a few different kitchens in the book, but that was the first one. And then I had written the story about the nun and the nurse, and I wanted to try that because that was very costumed. So I wanted to get a sense of how that would work. And trying to think of one of the other first images. But there was a period of sort of testing it, and then a big chunk of 2017 I just wrote, and I went back and forth, and and I learned so much about writing. I worked with a writing teacher, even though I have written pretty much my whole life. I mean, I've always journaled, and I've always, I write grants, and I mean, like, I'm pretty comfortable writing. This was a different type of writing, and it was great to have a teacher to work with. Except that every time I would feel like, oh, I'm getting this done, that chapter's done, I'm almost finished, I would drive back from our class and realize that everything that she told me meant that I had to rewrite the story. So it's so much about, writing is rewriting, but it was fantastic to do that. And then once I had like that solidly done, I spent a good chunk of 2018 making the photographs. And then I went back to the writing. So it sort of went through these different stages of going in and out of both.
Sure. So there's a lot of chatter in the chat, because Anthony DiTrolio says, I currently live in Jona's house. Yes.
I don't see you on here, but hello. And thank you for letting me knock on your door and take pictures outside your house.
The whole time I was reading the book, I was thinking like, I wonder if somebody lives in that house now and like how they would feel reading this book. Because the house is such a character. It's so much a part of the book. The house
It's
itself.
really, yeah.
Yeah. And also Donna Friedman, who used to be, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Donna Phelan, said, I went to school with Jona. I have loved every page and photograph of your book.
Oh, thank you so much. Hello.
Yeah. A lot of Cherry Hill love on the chat tonight. So we just have a couple more questions. You mentioned a little while ago that, you know, during the time in which you lived in Cherry Hill, one of the only ways that you would get news or connect to the outside world was through the phone. So the black rotary phone appears so many times in the book, even in places where it's unexpected. A good example is at the start of chapter 15 called Francie. It's on the back of your character. It's stuck to your character's back. What does the phone symbolize for you in the confines of the book?
Well, you know, it's funny because this kind of connects back to Laura, because it was something that we talked about a lot. Because we've talked about David Lynch, and David Lynch has this like incredible ability to ground the absurd in the authentic. And when Laura was reading it, and when she was reading it, there were a lot of drawings in the book, because all the pictures were basically storyboarded, and so she would be looking at them, and you know, she started to say that to me, like, you're taking this thing that everyone is familiar with, but you're making it absurd. And you're making people question, you know, why is it in that place? Because the phone is hanging on a tree, the phone is in the Lucky Charms picture, the phone is in the background of the Twigs picture. I mean, it appears throughout the book, you know, in an almost that sense of like find the phone thing. And it's supposed to be this idea that, you know, that initial phone call changed my perspective, that, you know, that I was just this kind of dreamy, flighty kid, and that phone call said I had to be a certain way. And it also, what I don't write about in the book, and which I had some sense of as I grew up, was that phone call scared my mother, because I think that what was really talked about was, is there an issue here? Is there some sort of learning disability? You know, that if you were a kid who was told to follow along in reading, and you just left the book closed on your desk and you didn't follow, it would stand out. And so I was doing this thing that stood out, and it made people question, is there like a larger learning issue? So it wasn't just your kid's not keeping up, it was, can your kid keep up? And so the idea was everything was sort of going along fine, and that phone call changed it, you know, and that sense that you can be having your evening or having your life, and you can get a call and things can go in a very different direction quickly. And I feared that as a kid. And so I tried to say my character feared that. And that sometimes even standing outside the house, I thought, what happened, you know, did something happen? And it all connected back to the metaphor of, you know, getting that phone call.
Sure. That makes sense. And the similar phone call, another very pivotal phone call came about your brother when he was away at school. I thought of that immediately when you were just describing that now. So I just want to let everyone know, I did share the link in the chat. You can click right directly on it. That takes you to the Inkwood Books page, the bookstore in Haddonfield that we're partnered with, and it is the main page for the Cherry Hill book if you want to order it from them, which I encourage you to do. It's a book that's worth reading multiple times, as someone else said earlier. So the last question that I have, unless other people have any more and they want to throw them in what ways, if any, has the pandemic, which has separated us from so many familiar places and people, impacted your thoughts on your hometown?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I don't know if it's made me think about Cherry Hill specifically. I mean, it's funny. I think one thing I will say is that my mother used to say to me all the time, "Why do you have to leave the house? You're always going." You know, what do you have to get to? Why do you have to leave the house? And sometimes now when I'm thinking that I really want to go to a restaurant, or I really want to go to a movie, or I really just want to go hang out with friends, I just think I can't leave the house. Like, it's almost like she got it, which is me not leaving the house. So, yeah, but I mean, I think one thing that I feel really strongly about is it just makes me sad that I can't be there. You know, that I can't tell you like how much I would like to have been there in person tonight. And I mean, I think when you make something and it's this personal and you spend this long working on it and you put so much into it, you know, what feels like the ending, the reward to that is to see how it connects with other people and to share that with other people. And it's just not been something that, you know, I've been able to do in the pandemic. And so, I mean, I thank God really for social, networking and social media, because I've received amazing things. Like, people have written me from New Zealand on Instagram and France, and talked about how much they connected with the story. And that is kind of amazing to me too, because I do feel like suburbia is a part of the story, and I feel like the house is a part of the story, but, you know, and the town is a part. But the people write and say, you know, I grew up in this little village, and it's not Cherry Hill, and it's different from what you say, and that house I live in is 200 years old. But I really connect with your story, and I really connect with wanting to see what's my own out away from this town, and I really want to discover, you know, what my abilities are, you know, how far I can push something. And so that sort of stuff is really incredible. But, you know, really it's just the sadness of not being able to be there.
Yeah, I think we have heard that same sort of sentiment from other authors that we've had throughout the pandemic, that it's, you know, you put such effort and time and energy and thought into a work, and then to release it into this strange world, it sounds like really challenging. And this work in particular, we all would have loved to share with you in particular in person for obvious reasons. So there's a couple more questions coming through. Laverne asked, what's your next project?
Well, it's not fully formed yet, but it's in the works, and it's a project that will look at women and women's inability to have a voice for too much of our history. And it will be told in a really similar way with stories and created images. So I won't say, you know, particular women, but I'll just say that's kind of where it's headed right now.
Well, Carol Harding said, thank you for sharing your childhood reflections so honestly. The book reminded me of so many of my experiences and what it was to be a young girl growing up when we did, and how those experiences echo in my life today. So
Thank you.
Certainly. And Jane says, you can come back when the installation comes to Cherry Hill, Jona. Amen to that. Suzanne asks, what do your children think about your stories of growing up in Cherry Hill?
Oh, I have one son, and I think he, I mean, honestly, for the most part, at this point, you know, he participated. I mean, he's a painter, so he actually painted sets. Like, one of the pictures in the book is of me going to the actual pediatrician was named Dr. Shivers, but going to the pediatrician, and he painted that set. And you know what, at times I think he just feels like this is just like one more project my mom is working on. But the really interesting thing is all his friends are reading it, and they're very affected by it. Like, they're very engaged in the last 4 chapters. And that sense, because they're all 19, and a lot of them have taken gap years from college because of COVID. So this sense of like wanting to launch and wanting to get out there, and that itchy feeling of how one does that, I think they really connect with that. Yeah, but he's supportive, and he jumps on, and he helped me edit the prologue piece that everybody watched, and you know, it's a good collaboration.
That's wonderful that you guys can work together on, and that he's also an artist, and that's something that you share. Yeah, I think it's a tough time to be someone who's about to launch. There's not a lot of launching going on right now, unfortunately. Got to put a pause on that. So those are all of our discussion questions. We're coming to the end of our event tonight. Thank you so much for being here. This was a wonderful conversation. The book is Cherry Hill. Everyone, please consider buying it, support your local bookstore, and we certainly also will have copies available through the library. And there was some chatter too that we should be purchasing your other books as well, and I agree. So we will be looking into that really soon. Thank you so much, Jona.
It was a great place to grow up, and a nice, I'm glad I could visit again. So I really appreciate it. Thank you
so much. And thanks to everyone who came tonight. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.